Why are 1% houses so important? How to buy and sell, invest in real estate is an out-of-state real estate investor. Investing in Indianapolis is an out-of-state real estate investor. Why are 1% houses so important? I'm Ozzy Mail, my good friend Joe Crum. Would it make more sense to buy rentals in California and take advantage of the appreciation? So this series is for people, investors who are buying out of state, invested in Indianapolis real estate, who want to turn $200,000 into $100K a month passive income forever. Takes 10 to 15 years. That's the bad news. That takes 10 to 15 years. You won't make any money. The good news is you don't have to do anything. So let's do, or Joe, you want to go first with this? Why are 1%
Sure.
houses so important for our safe houses? Why is that important?
All right, let's do a breakdown. Let's say you have $400,000 to invest, and you want to have, slightly positive cash flow or break even at the worst. You
Mhm.
can buy, say, 10 houses in Indianapolis for $150,000 each. You put 20% down, plus closing costs. That's about $40,000 per house, and they'll give you a bit better than break-even cash flow, and they'll appreciate about 100% over a 10-year period. At least that's historical in Indianapolis. So if you lease option them, you'll get a bit more every month to apply towards the principal. And you can use that money to pay off the property in, say, 9 to 15 years, depending on a lot of different factors. But you can pay that thing off a lot faster than the 30 years that's the mortgage. So at the end of that 10-year period, they're going to be worth about twice what you paid. So if you buy $1.5 million worth of property times two, it went up 100%. That means you've got $3 million. And you have between $10,000 and $20,000 per month of income. That's your net income after your expenses, depending on how much your rents have increased during that 10-year period. So your basically your mortgage is paid off over that 10, 15-year period, and now you have income of that $10,000 to $20,000 a month. So you turn $400,000 into $3 million in equity and $10,000 to $20,000 per month in a 10-year period. So the other option that
Real
you've got,
quickly though, just to add to that, I would say to make that real, to simplify that, a safe house is $1,000 a month, basically forever, and it'll double every 10 to 15 years. So just take $1,000 and then $2,000 a month for every one of these safe houses, the 150K, 1% houses, and then comparing that to what you're about to say now.
high-end markets. So
Yeah.
let's take that same $400,000 that you buy, one house, worth $1.5 million. So let's say in California, some 1,200 square foot house up in Pasadena. So let's say you put $350,000 down, it's 20% down, plus you have another $50,000 in closing costs. So you got $400,000 into it. And you get a new loan of 1.15 million that has a mortgage payment of approximately $9,000 a month, but it only rents for $4,500 a month. So you have a negative.
Close. Yeah.
so, so you have a negative cash flow of $4,500. Now, eventually, the rents will rise to cover the mortgage. Over time, rents are going to go up,
With
but
the
it's
ocean. Yeah.
yeah, but it's going to take at least 10 years just to get to the point where you're breaking even on your payments. So let's say it took you 10 years and it does go up enough over that time to get $9,000 a month income. That means that you have $4,500 a month times 120 months. So about $540,000 over 10 years that you have to come out of pocket negative cash flow to hold this property. So let's say the values increase in California at 20% instead of the 10% that we see historically in Indianapolis. And California is unpredictable. So you don't know if it's going to go up 20%. Let's say that it does, and it does that every year for the next 10 years. That gives you 200%, because I'm just trying to look at what's the best possible scenario here. So that gives you
Yeah.
200% over 10 years. So now your property, is worth, if it went up, 101.5 million dollars, over, 200% over that period of time, now it's worth $4.5 million. Now you still owe $1 million on the property because you're still making payments on that because you had all that negative cash flow and you couldn't put any more money towards buying it down. You also put almost $1 million of your own cash into it. So your equity position now
Yeah.
on this 4.5 million is really $2.5 million. So I guess that's not terrible. I mean, if you're breaking even on your income, for the next 10 or 20 years while you pay it off, in addition to the first 10 years. So you got to really wait, another 10 years after that, and maybe 10 years after that before you actually start seeing a return. So in 10 years with, $400,000 investment in Indianapolis, you turn $400,000 into a $3 million in equity. You own it free and clear, and you get to take home ten to $20,000 per month in income that you can spend while the values keep going up on the property. And that happens in 10 years. In Los Angeles, where the values are 10 times higher and the appreciation sometimes goes up, 20%, you end up, maybe with $1 million in cash in your pocket. And you have $2.5 million in equity. And you have, 15 or 20 years left before you start to actually get income on the property because still have to make payments on it. So if instead of doing it that way, you spent that full $1 million in Indy and bought 20 houses. Instead of spending the $400,000 on the down payment and $600,000 on the negative cash flow, you take that $1 million and you bought 20 houses, you'd have $6 million in equity and $20,000 to $40,000 a month after 10 years. It's the exact same amount of money that you have to invest, but the two
Yeah.
very different, outcomes, even though the higher priced home had twice the appreciation, because it was in a different market, assuming that it stayed stable. And it's possible values could drop in a more volatile market like LA. We saw a 60% drop in 2008, and it took 5 years for those values to come back up again. Of course, they did go up again, and they did come back. It's not there's people making money in LA real estate. I'm not saying they're not, but is it the best option? Are there better ways to do it? And I posit that Indianapolis is the place to do this because these numbers pencil out so dramatically better.
Yeah. Good stuff. And that was a great breakdown of a comparison between like LA. And it's not just California, it could be anywhere, in Florida, New York, the coast, these big markets that
Right.
where you have these pricing. And when you're going through it, even though we've gone through this before, every time you go through it, every time I look at these numbers, it's like, wow, this is crazy. And these numbers sound crazy. This is what people are doing. And people are going into their pocket, thousands of dollars every month because they want that appreciation. This is happening where they're buying, fix ups, that are $2 million. Joe just talked about $1.5 million fixer uppers. This is happening in these markets because they don't really have a choice. But ultimately, I think, was that the end of your answer? Because I'll go over in some of my math
Yeah, go ahead.
here. Yeah. Okay. So what my notes here, financial discipline gets diluted with headlines about crypto, billions, real estate, stuff like that. The one thing, there's this great quote by Epictetus. We love this quote. We use this a lot. If one oversteps the bounds of moderation, the greatest pleasures cease to please. I'll repeat that. If one oversteps the bounds of moderation, the greatest pleasures cease to please. One of the things that happens if you're constantly feeding yourself with all this crap about crypto or making $1 billion off one investment or these like, NFTs or taking, these, $5 million houses, these big headlines that you see is that when you start to see the numbers like 1% houses or a safe house, it seems like that's no matter how attractive or amazing that could be, it ceases to please because you're used to these insane, feeding yourself these insane dopamine hit type of numbers. There's a book, Admiral McRaven. We've talked about this book before. Here's a quote I've got from this. What do you need to know as an officer? What's the most important thing you should consider when developing a plan? What is the most fundamental aspect of a war strategy, operation, or tactics? No plan of operations reaches with any certainty beyond the first encounter with the enemy's force. Then no plan survives. In other words, always have a plan B. As Mike Tyson always said, everyone's got a plan so they get punched in the mouth. One of the best things that 1% houses will do is it will allow you to be adaptable. It will allow you to survive. It says no plan survives and the first encounter with an enemy. A 1% house will allow you to do that. As Joe said, even in the worst case scenario, 20% in 2008, The 1% houses chugged along just fine. The more important question, what happened to the rents? And if you maintain the rent in those properties, you weren't taking a big hit. And maybe you got a vacancy because somebody left. But as far as the actual rental, you're able to fill those houses pretty quickly because the actual rental market did not collapse. And these other markets, that's not what happened at all, especially in Vegas. And so 1% houses, what it allows you to do is it allows you to gives you power through adaptability. This is about creating a forever fund. Our goal is to create money that will be steady, passive, and predictable. So generational passive income and create an irreversible income ascension or social mobility, changing your income class and getting there irreversibly. With the stuff Joe's talking about, when you have like the stock market stuff, and one of the big things with the stock market is you're not able to enjoy any of that income without sacrificing your compounding. You have to keep reinvesting that money. Anytime you start taking money out, it's at the cost of your returns. So that's a big problem. But also, if you did have 5, 6 houses like that in California, maybe or in a high market like that, there's a lot of volatility with the rents, with the property values. It would be much better to have those houses in a market like the Midwest. If you're talking about income ascension and irreversibly being 30 grand a month, no matter what, forever. This is our floor, and you're able to do it with a much smaller amount of resources. To do that, we use conservative projections to develop floors. So we can find 1%, 2%, and even 3% houses. So a 3% house is usually going to be under $30,000 a month. Go to the Indiana State Fairgrounds on Zillow. We talked about this in one of our other videos, and you can see 3% houses that are $20,000 that will technically rent for $600 a month. That means somebody will sign an agreement that says they'll pay you $600 a month. Now, getting that money, like we talk about, is going to take a tank every month. But there are 3% houses. There's also 2% houses. Those are houses that are generally going to be at $45,000. You're not going to find a $50,000 house that rents for $1,000 a month usually, but you do find $40,000 houses that rent for $800 a month. So those are 2% houses. So why don't we work with 2% houses? It might seem like that's the better thing to do. You're going to make more money than a 1% house. 1% house is going to be generally between $150,000 and $200,000. The reason we'll work with them is because there's more equity there. And this is the main thing we'll talk about in a second with how do we create our passive income. So we focus on 1% because of the outcomes. The goal is to make $1,000 a month forever and then $2,000 a month to double that. And the 1% houses are your best bet at doing that. That's very unlikely to happen with the 2% house. And there's a lot more baggage that comes in with dealing with these $40,000 a month houses. And the 3% houses, these are meth labs. We don't mess with those. But on paper, they look great. The number one formula here, this is my last item here, is understanding what passive income is. And so few people get this formula. It's really simple. It's equity times production. So the name of the game here is how do I control the most amount of equity with the best production with the least amount of resources? So I take a very limited amount of resources and I control the highest amount of equity with the best production. And if that's the combination you're looking for, you're not going to find something much better than 1% houses. We create equity from buying and building real estate and businesses. What skill does with the business, we want to grow it very quickly. Time does with real estate. So we allow time to take over. Time becomes our ally. So you don't need a lot of skill if you're acquiring these safe houses. With 1% safe houses, we get predictability and scalability. With 1%, we know we can net that 8%. We know what our production is going to be. So all we have to do is acquire equity. And usually that equity is going to be those $150,000 houses. So that is how we take a safe amount of equity, $150,000 houses normally, and we create that reliable production of 1% a month. And that is the magic around these 1% houses. That's how we can create 10, 20, 30, 40, 50K a month passively, safely, predictably, and with scalability by using these 1% houses. Anything to add to that, Joe?
Yeah,
Yes.
that 1% zone, that's the Goldilocks zone. You know,
Yeah.
you get into those 2%, 3%, it's too hot, it's too cold, or it's too hot, if the price is too high or too
It's too
low.
crack housey. Yeah.
So that central zone, that zone that is going to be the easiest to manage and give you the highest return, you're always looking for that tipping point. And that's what we're calling the Goldilocks zone. So that's the 1%.
Yes.
And it may be 0.75 or it may be 1.25,
Right.
there's a zone, but in there, but it's still, that's where you want to be to have that sweet spot.
Yes. Over time, it works out to that.
Mhm.
Yes. All
And,
right.
and
Good.
actually, eventually it goes up because
Yeah.
this is the beauty of 30-year mortgages, which if you look at any country in the world, they don't have 30-year mortgages.
Yeah.
30-year mortgages don't exist anywhere except the United States. And 30-year mortgages, fixed mortgages means that you're buying a property at a particular price for the next 30 years. And inflation erodes the value of that payment that you're making every month, but the payment still stays the same. It erodes it for the bank, but it doesn't erode it for you. It increases it for you because you only have to make this payment, and the values on the property just keep going up, and the inflation keeps going up, and the rents keep going up. Those are that's the beauty of real estate investing, because
Yeah.
you can buy it over time like that on a fixed payment that doesn't change even though the income goes up.
Yeah, I don't know if I covered this. Why should you listen to Joe and I in this video? We've collectively been doing real estate, our experience about 50 years, on our team over 100 years. We've got thousands of success stories. That's the number one reason to listen to us. We have thousands of success stories in over 15 countries of people getting from 0 to 5, 10, 15, 20, 100 grand a month and beyond. When it comes to this, we've obsessed over this and helping our people achieve the outcomes that we're talking about. And that's why it's important to, when you hear these numbers, that, like when we talk about what Joe just said about the number, the 30-year mortgage, what you're doing is you're arranging your resources, your limited resources, to collect the best amount of equity in production. And that's what 1% houses do. That allows you to use that 30 years, where you're basically, time is your ally in that sense, that your payoff, but that you're using it to collect the right kind of equity, the right kind of asset, which in this case would be a 1% safe house. The whole point of this program, this series that we're doing, is to turn $200,000 into $100,000 a month, or $100,000 a year passive income, 10 to 15 years. Bad news is it takes 10 to 15 years and you don't make any money in the meantime. The good news is you don't have to do anything. You don't even have to leave your house. So for more on that, click the first link in the description. We'll get in much more depth about 1% houses and why this is so important. It's just math. It's just physics. When you understand the math, it's really easy to get this done and to create these outcomes.
There's no secret sauce here. We're not trying to sell something, that is smoke and mirrors. These are real numbers that you can crunch the numbers. You can pull out your calculator. You can look at the videos that we've created with those crunched numbers, and you'll see exactly where we came up with it. And if you want to dispute it, great. I mean, I'm sure there are things that could, they could come out of the blue on this, but I think if you look at the numbers overall, you're gonna realize that these investments are better than anything else that you can do. Wait till you see some of these deal dissections that we do.
Yes, and also the outcomes that we create. That's the only thing that matters. Over one of these videos, I go over why should you listen to us, and I always say the number one thing is the most important thing is the outcomes. The outcomes, guys. So that's why 1% houses are so important. Thank you so much. We'll see you next time, guys. Thanks.